The message came without warning. It traveled across the cold emptiness of space, through relay stations and communication satellites, until it reached every human ship, every colony, and every screen on Earth. The voice that spoke was deep and filled with contempt. It belonged to Commander Zethrak of the Velthari Dominion, and his words would change everything. "Humans of Earth," the alien commander said, "we have watched you crawl out of your poisonous world. We have studied your planet with its earthquakes, its hurricanes, its creatures that kill without mercy. You think surviving such a place makes you strong. You are wrong. You are merely insects who learn to avoid being crushed." On the bridge of the USS Relentless, Captain Nate Hoffman stood perfectly still as the message played. Around him, his crew had stopped their work. Every eye was fixed on the main screen where the alien commander's image flickered. Zethrak was tall, nearly 8 feet, with dark chitinous plates covering his body like natural armor. His eyes were completely black, without pupils, and they seemed to absorb light, rather than reflect it. "The Velthari Dominion has conquered 17 star systems," Zethrak continued. "We have crushed species far older and more advanced than yours. We do not negotiate. We do not compromise. We take what we want, and we destroy what resists us." Lieutenant Commander Amy Vance moved to stand beside Hoffman. She was his second in command, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She had served with Hoffman for 6 years, through border skirmishes and diplomatic missions, and one very bad situation near the Kepler colonies that neither of them talked about anymore. "He's enjoying this," she said quietly. "Look at him. He thinks we're already beaten." Hoffman nodded slightly but said nothing. He was watching the alien's body language, the way Zethrak held himself, the slight movements of his head. There was arrogance there, certainly, but there was something else too. A kind of hunger. "We offer you one chance," Zethrak said, and his voice dropped to something almost soft. "Surrender your outer colonies. Give us your resources. Kneel before the Dominion, and we will allow your species to continue existing. You will serve us, but you will live." The alien paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had turned cold. "Refuse, and we will make examples of your people. We will burn your colonies, one by one. We will drag your leaders before the galaxy and show everyone what happens to those who defy us. Your children will grow up knowing only fear and slavery. Your name will become a warning to others." The message ended. The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one on the bridge spoke. Finally, a young ensign named Kevin Park broke the silence. "Sir, what do we do?" Hoffman turned to face his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, in the way they held themselves. And why wouldn't they be? The Velthari had a reputation that stretched across the galaxy. They were conquerors. They were monsters. They had destroyed entire civilizations, but Hoffman had been a soldier for 23 years. He had fought in the Mars Uprising. He had survived the disaster at New Shanghai. He had lost friends, buried brothers, and kept fighting anyway. Fear was an old companion, and he had learned long ago that it only had power if you let it. "The Velthari have made a mistake," he said calmly. "They've studied Earth. They know about our predators, our natural disasters, our history of wars and plagues. They think they understand us." He paused. "They don't." Amy Vance tilted her head. "What did they miss?" "Everything that matters." Hoffman moved to the main console and pulled up a star chart. "They see a death world and think it made us weak because we had to struggle to survive. They don't understand that struggle is what forged us. Every generation of humanity has faced extinction. Ice ages, famines, wars that killed millions. And every single time, we didn't just survive. We came back stronger." He looked at each member of his crew in turn. "The Velthari have conquered species that surrendered when faced with superior force. They've never met a species that refuses to give up. They've never fought an enemy that treats impossible odds as just another Tuesday. Down in the crew quarters, word of the transmission spread like fire. Soldiers gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. Some were angry. Some were afraid. Some were both. Gunnery Sergeant Rick Delgado sat alone in the mess hall, cleaning his sidearm with slow, methodical movements. He was a big man, quiet most of the time, with hands that had done things he didn't talk about. When a younger Marine asked him if he was scared, Delgado just shrugged. "Scared?" he said. "Sure. Only a fool wouldn't be scared. But I've been scared before. Fear doesn't change what needs to be done." On Earth, the response to the Velthari ultimatum was immediate. Emergency sessions were called. Military commanders were summoned. Politicians argued and debated and pointed fingers at each other, because that was what politicians did. But in certain quiet rooms, far from cameras and public attention, different conversations were happening. Colonel Pete Dawson received a call at 3 in the morning. The voice on the other end spoke only 4 words. "It's time. Green light." Dawson hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for a long moment. Then he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. He made his own calls. One by one, people across the country received the same message. Some were soldiers. Some were scientists. Some were people whose official records said they had died years ago. They were the Boogeymen. And they had work to do. Back on the Relentless, Captain Hoffman recorded his response to the Velthari transmission. It was short. It was simple. And it was broadcast on an open channel for the entire galaxy to hear. "Commander Zethrak," Hoffman said, his voice steady. "Humanity has received your message. We have discussed your terms. And we have a response." He paused. "Come and take them. If you can." The words echoed across space. In Velthari command centers, officers laughed at the arrogance of these primitive humans. They had no idea what they were facing. But they would learn. Soon, they would all learn that Earth's children were not prey. They were predators. And the hunt was about to begin. The facility had no name on any map. It existed beneath the Nevada desert, carved into rock that was older than human civilization. The elevators went down 17 floors, past storage rooms and research labs and armories that held weapons most generals had never heard of. At the very bottom, behind doors that required 3 separate biometric scans to open, was a briefing room where 12 people sat waiting. Colonel Pete Dawson walked in at exactly 6 in the morning. He was 54 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much to ever look soft again. He had served in conflicts that appeared in history books and conflicts that had been erased from them. The people in this room trusted him completely, and he trusted them the same way. "Good morning," Dawson said. "I'm going to skip the pleasantries because we don't have time for them." 3 days ago, the Velthari Dominion delivered an ultimatum to humanity: surrender or die. Our official response was defiance. Our unofficial response is why you're all here. He pressed a button, and holographic images filled the air above the central table. The Velthari appeared in perfect detail. Their armored bodies, their weapons, their ships. Data scrolled alongside the images: height, weight, sensory capabilities, known weaknesses. "The Velthari have conquered 17 star systems," Dawson continued. "They've never lost a war. They believe they're invincible." He paused. "They're wrong. Every species has weaknesses. The Velthari's weakness is that they've never faced an enemy like us." Sergeant First Class Danny Ruiz leaned forward in his chair. He was 36, born in El Paso, raised in foster homes after his parents died in a factory accident. The military had given him a family, a purpose, and skills that made him very dangerous. Scars crossed his knuckles from fights he'd won, and a few he'd barely survived. "What makes us different?" Ruiz asked. "They've fought plenty of species. Some of them were probably pretty tough." "Tough, yes," Dawson agreed. "But not like us. The Velthari conquer through overwhelming force and terror. They show up with massive fleets, destroy any resistance, and make examples of anyone who fights back. Most species surrender once they realize they can't win a straight fight. He smiled thinly. Humanity doesn't do surrender. And we don't fight straight. Staff Sergeant Maria Lopez spoke up. She was small, barely 5'4", with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like someone's friendly neighbor. She was, in fact, one of the most lethal people on the planet. You're talking about unconventional warfare. I'm talking about becoming their nightmares, Dawson said. The Velthari have a staging base on the moon of Kethris 4. 3,000 troops. Heavy armor. Air superiority. Supply lines that stretch back to their home systems. By any normal measure, that base is untouchable. Corporal Eddie Grant grinned. He was the youngest in the room, 28. With red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. His specialty was demolitions, and he had a gift for making things explode in creative ways. Good thing we're not normal. Exactly. Dawson pulled up a new set of images. The moon of Kethris 4 appeared. A frozen rock, covered in ice and jagged mountains. The Velthari base was visible as a cluster of structures near the equator. Your mission is simple to explain and difficult to execute. You will infiltrate this base. You will not engage in direct combat. Instead, you will systematically terrorize the garrison until they break. Specialist Heather Quinn raised her hand. She was the team's electronic warfare expert, a former NSA analyst who had gotten bored with just watching and wanted to participate. Her skills with computers and communications bordered on supernatural. When you say terrorize, what exactly do you mean? I mean you're going to make them afraid to sleep, Dawson said. Afraid to patrol. Afraid to eat. You're going to make them see threats everywhere and enemies nowhere. You're going to turn that base into a haunted house, and every single Velthari soldier is going to become convinced that something is hunting them in the dark. Master Sergeant Curtis Blake nodded slowly. He was the oldest operator in the room. 47. With a face like weathered leather, and hands that had done terrible things for good reasons. He had once spent 47 days behind enemy lines with nothing but a knife, and walked out carrying intelligence that changed the course of a war. Psychological warfare. Break their minds before we break their bodies. The Velthari think they understand fear, Dawson said. They've used it as a weapon for centuries, but they've never experienced it. Not really. They've never been prey. He looked around the room at each of his operators. You're going to teach them what it feels like. The briefing lasted another 2 hours. They studied the base layout, the patrol patterns, the communication systems. They learned about Velthari psychology, their social structures, their superstitions. Every species had things that scared them, even if they didn't admit it. The key was finding those fears and exploiting them. When the briefing ended, the team gathered their gear. They would launch in 6 hours, traveling on a stealth ship that officially didn't exist to a moon that humanity officially had no interest in. If they succeeded, no one would ever know their names. If they failed, no one would ever know they had tried. Maria Lopez found Danny Ruiz in the armory, checking his weapons for the 3rd time. You ready for this? She asked. Ruiz shrugged. Ready as I'll ever be. You? I've been ready my whole life. She picked up a knife and tested its edge. My grandmother used to tell me stories about La Llorona, the weeping woman who steals children in the night. I used to have nightmares about her. And now? Lopez smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. Now, I'm going to become someone else's nightmare. Seems like justice to me. In his quarters, Curtis Blake wrote a letter he would never send. It was addressed to his daughter, who thought he worked for a security company and had no idea what her father really did. He told her he loved her. He told her he was proud of the woman she had become. He told her that everything he did so that she could live in a safer world. Then he burned the letter, packed his bag, and went to war. The stealth ship launched at midnight. It carried 12 operators into the darkness between stars. They were soldiers, spies, and ghosts. They were America's answer to an alien empire that thought it could threaten humanity and face no consequences. They were the Boogeymen. And the Velthari had no idea what was coming. The moon of Kethris 4 was a frozen wasteland. Temperatures dropped to 200 degrees below zero at night. The atmosphere was thin and poisonous. Nothing lived there except the 3,000 Velthari soldiers who had turned it into a staging base for the invasion of human space. Sub-Commander Thrace stood at the window of his command center, looking out at the ice fields that stretched to the horizon. He was proud of what they had built here. The base was a fortress, protected by sensor nets, patrol routes, and enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Nothing could approach without being detected. Nothing could breach their defenses. He had no idea that 12 humans had already been on the moon for 3 days. The Boogeymen had arrived in a ship designed to be invisible. It absorbed sensor signals instead of reflecting them. Its engines ran cold, leaving no heat signature. They had landed in a crater 50 miles from the base and traveled the rest of the way on foot, moving only at night, leaving no tracks in the ice. Now they waited, watching, learning, planning. Maria Lopez lay in a snowbank 300 meters from the perimeter fence. She had been motionless for 6 hours, her body covered in thermal insulation that hid her heat signature from Velthari sensors. Through her scope, she watched the guards patrol with mechanical precision. Every 15 minutes, 2 soldiers walked the same path. Every 30 minutes, they checked in with their command center. She noted everything. The timing, the blind spots, the moment when one guard turned to say something to another, and both of them stopped watching the fence for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. The first Velthari to disappear was a perimeter guard named Vestan. He was patrolling the northern fence line when he heard something strange. It sounded like whispered laughter, carried on the thin wind. He stopped, his weapon raised, scanning the darkness. "Command, this is Vestan," he said into his communicator. "I'm hearing unusual sounds. Requesting backup." "Describe the sounds," came the response. Vestan paused. "It sounds like voices. Whispering. But there's nothing on my sensors. Probably just wind interference. Continue your patrol." Vestan took 3 more steps. Then his communicator went silent. When his partner found him 20 minutes later, he was alive, but unresponsive. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. His mouth moved constantly, forming words in a language no one could understand. Sub-Commander Thrace was annoyed when he received the report. "Probably some kind of breakdown," he said. "Send him to medical and increase patrols in that sector." But over the next 2 nights, 5 more soldiers disappeared. Some were found like Vestan, alive but broken. Others simply vanished. Their communicators stopped transmitting. Their tracking beacons went dark. Search parties found nothing but empty uniforms lying in the snow, as if the soldiers wearing them had simply evaporated. The base began to change. Soldiers who had been confident became nervous. Patrols that had been routine became tense. Everyone started looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows. Then the symbols appeared. Eddie Grant had spent months studying Velthari culture before the mission. He knew their history, their myths, their deepest fears. Every species had stories about monsters in the dark. The Velthari were no different. They had legends about creatures called the Hollow Ones, spirits of soldiers who had died alone and forgotten, who came back to drag the living into the void. Grant painted their symbol on the walls of the base. A crude skull with empty eye sockets and a grinning mouth. He left them in places where they would be found at dawn, when the night patrols returned. He left them in places that should have been impossible to reach. Panic began to spread. "This is psychological warfare," Sub-Commander Thrace insisted to his officers. "Primitive human tactics. We will not be frightened by paint on walls." But his officers weren't so sure. They had all seen the symbols. They had all heard the stories about soldiers found with their minds broken. And late at night, when the base grew quiet, they had all heard the sounds. Footsteps in empty corridors. Whispered voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Heather Quinn had hacked their communications network on the second day. It hadn't even been difficult. The Velthari were so confident in their military superiority that they had neglected their cybersecurity. Now she could listen to every conversation, read every message, and when she wanted to, inject sounds into their helmet speakers. She started small. A whisper here. A laugh there, just enough to make soldiers question what they had heard. But as the days passed, she became bolder. She learned their names from their communications and whispered them in the darkness. She found their fears in their private messages to friends and family, and she used those fears against them. One soldier was terrified of being buried alive. Quinn whispered about walls closing in whenever he was alone. Another was haunted by the death of his brother. In an earlier campaign, Quinn made him hear his brother's voice calling for help in the empty corridors. By the end of the first week, the Velthari garrison was coming apart. Curtis Blake watched it all from a hidden position in the mountains overlooking the base. He had been a soldier for nearly 30 years. He had seen enemies break before. But this was different. This wasn't breaking them with bullets and bombs. This was breaking them with fear. Phase 1 complete, he reported to the team. They're scared. Now we make them terrified. Maria Lopez acknowledged the transmission. She was already moving toward the base, her knife in hand. Tonight, she would let herself be seen. Just for a moment. Just long enough for one soldier to catch a glimpse of her face before she vanished into the shadows. Fear spread fastest when it had a face, and she intended to give them one they would never forget. The Velthari had come to Kethris IV as conquerors. They had expected to stage an invasion, crush humanity, and add another trophy to their empire. Instead, they had become prey, and the hunt was just beginning. Commander Zethrak arrived, on Kethris 4 inches of fury. His shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere like a falling blade, and when he stepped onto the frozen ground, his black eyes swept across the base with barely contained rage. He had conquered worlds, he had broken species that had seemed unbreakable, and now he was being told that a handful of humans had turned his garrison into a collection of frightened children. Sub-Commander Thrace met him at the landing pad, and Zethrak could see the change in him immediately. The officer who had been so confident just 2 weeks ago now moved with nervous energy. His eyes darted constantly, checking shadows, watching corners. Even in the bright light of the base's artificial sun, he seemed afraid. "Report," Zethrak demanded. Thrace swallowed hard. "Commander, we have lost 47 soldiers. 12 are dead. 35 are in medical facilities, suffering from severe psychological trauma. We have not been able to capture or kill a single human. How is that possible? You have 3,000 troops, sensors, weapons, air support. The humans don't fight like any enemy we've faced before," Thrace said. "They don't attack our positions. They don't try to destroy our equipment. They just appear and disappear, and every time they do, more of our soldiers break." Zethrak grabbed Thrace by the neck and lifted him off the ground. "You are telling me that 12 primitives from a deathworld have done this? That the mighty Velthari Dominion is being defeated by ghosts and whispers?" "Commander," Thrace gasped, "you don't understand. These humans are not normal. They are something else. Something worse." Zethrak threw Thrace to the ground in disgust. He would handle this himself. He ordered every soldier in the base to assemble. Every vehicle, every weapon, every piece of equipment. They would sweep the moon from one end to the other. They would find these humans and crush them. The Boogeymen had been waiting for exactly this. From their hidden positions in the mountains, they watched 3,000 Velthari soldiers march out of the base in perfect formation. Tanks rolled alongside infantry. Aircraft flew overhead. It was an impressive display of military power, the kind that had terrified countless species into surrender. Curtis Blake smiled when he saw it. "They're doing exactly what we wanted," he said over the team's encrypted channel. "Moving in force, staying together, thinking numbers will protect them. Harkley stay. Class Desaro." Danny Ruiz checked his weapon. "What's the play?" "The canyon," Blake replied. "That's where we break them." There was only one approach to the area where the humans had been operating, a narrow canyon that cut through the mountains, wide enough for vehicles but with steep walls on either side. It was the obvious path. The Velthari would have to take it. And the Boogeymen had spent 3 days turning that canyon into a nightmare. Eddie Grant had planted charges along both walls, not explosives designed to kill, but devices that would produce blinding light, deafening sound, and clouds of chemical smoke that would scramble Velthari sensory organs. Maria Lopez had hidden speakers throughout the canyon, connected to Heather Quinn's communication hack, and at certain points along the path, mirrors had been placed at angles that would create impossible reflections, shapes that seemed to move when nothing was there. The Velthari column entered the canyon just as the sun began to set. Commander Zethrak was near the front, riding in an armored vehicle. He was confident now. His soldiers surrounded him. His weapons were ready. Whatever tricks these humans had been playing, they were about to end. Then the world exploded. Light and sound hit them from every direction. Soldiers stumbled, blinded by flashes that seemed to come from everywhere. The chemical smoke poured in, and suddenly their sensors were useless, showing nothing but static. In the chaos, the speakers activated, and whispered voices filled every helmet, every vehicle, every communicator. They whispered names. They whispered secrets. They knew things that should have been impossible to know. Private fears, hidden shames. Words spoken only in the darkness of personal quarters. The Velthari formation shattered. Soldiers fired wildly at shadows. Vehicles crashed into each other. Aircraft, unable to see through the smoke, pulled back in confusion. And in the midst of it all, the Boogeymen struck, not as an army, not as a force that could be fought. They struck as phantoms, appearing for just a moment before vanishing again. A shot from an impossible angle would drop a soldier. A knife would flash in the smoke, and another enemy would fall. Grenades appeared in vehicles as if by magic, and explosions tore through the chaos. Maria Lopez moved through the battlefield like a ghost. She had spent years training for exactly this kind of combat. Close quarters, poor visibility, confusion, everywhere. She was in her element, and the Velthari never saw her coming. When they did catch glimpses of her, she made sure to smile. Let them see her face. Let them know that death had a name. Danny Ruiz worked alongside Eddie Grant, using the chaos to plant more charges, create more confusion, keep the enemy off balance. They weren't trying to kill all 3,000 soldiers. That was impossible. They were trying to break them, and it was working. Curtis Blake found Commander Zethrak cowering behind an overturned transport vehicle. The alien commander was twice his size, covered in natural armor, armed with weapons that could tear a human apart. But when Blake emerged from the smoke, Zethrak didn't fight. He scrambled backward, his black eyes wide with something Blake recognized instantly: fear. Pure, primal fear. Blake moved slowly, deliberately. He wanted Zethrak to see him clearly, to understand what was happening. He knelt beside the alien commander and pressed his knife against the soft tissue of Zethrak's throat, one of the few places the chitinous armor didn't protect. "You wanted to make examples of humanity," Blake said quietly. "Congratulations, you succeeded." Zethrak trembled. "What are you?" "We're what your deathworld made us," Blake replied. "We're the thing that survived everything our planet threw at us. We're the predators that evolved to hunt other predators. We're humanity's answer to creatures like you." He leaned closer. "We're the Boogeymen, and we want you to live." "Why?" Zethrak whispered. "Because dead commanders don't tell stories. And we want you to tell everyone what happened here. We want you to describe what you saw. We want you to explain to your Dominion exactly what kind of enemy they've made." Blake stood and stepped back into the smoke. "Run home, Commander, and don't ever come back." When the smoke finally cleared, the Velthari found themselves alone in the canyon. The humans had vanished as completely as they had appeared. Behind them lay hundreds of dead and wounded soldiers. Around them lay thousands more who would never fight again. Not because of injuries, but because of what they had seen. Commander Zethrak ordered the retreat. No one argued. The Velthari withdrawal from human space happened faster than anyone expected. Within one standard week, every Dominion ship had retreated past the border. Within 2 weeks, their forward bases had been abandoned. Within a month, the Velthari had signed a non-aggression treaty that gave humanity everything they had demanded, and more. The official explanation cited strategic reallocation of resources and changing military priorities. No one in the galaxy believed it. Stories began to spread. At first, they were whispered in trading posts on the frontier, passed between merchants who had heard them from Velthari refugees. Then, they reached the core worlds, where diplomats shared them in quiet corners and military officers discussed them in classified briefings. By the time 6 months had passed, every species in the known galaxy had heard some version of what happened on Kethris 4. The stories varied in their details. Some said the humans had sent 100 soldiers. Others said it was 1,000. Some claimed they used advanced weapons that could pierce any armor. Others insisted they used nothing but knives and shadows. But certain elements appeared in every version of the tale. The humans came from a deathworld, a planet so hostile that every creature on it had evolved to kill. And the humans hadn't just survived there, they had conquered it. They had turned their planet's endless dangers into training, transforming themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before. They didn't fight like other species. They didn't line up their armies and charge at enemy positions. They crept in the darkness. They struck without warning. They broke minds before they broke bodies, and when they were done, they vanished without a trace. The Velthari called them demons. Other species called them phantoms, shadows, nightmares given form. But the name that stuck, the name that spread across the stars, was the one the humans had given themselves: the Boogeymen. Commander Zethrak never commanded again. He returned to his homeworld a broken creature, jumping at sounds that weren't there, seeing enemies in every shadow. He spent his remaining years in a psychiatric facility, waking each night screaming about voices that whispered his name. The doctors tried everything they knew. Nothing helped. Whatever the humans had done to him, it had reached something deep in his mind and never let go. On Earth, the Boogeymen returned as quietly as they had left. Their stealth ship landed at the same Nevada facility where they had received their orders. No reporters waited for them. No crowds cheered their names. No medals were pinned to their chests. That wasn't what they did this for. Colonel Pete Dawson met them in the underground briefing room. He looked older than he had when they'd left, the strain of the past weeks visible in his face. But when he saw his operators walk through the door, all 12 of them alive and whole, he allowed himself a rare smile. "Welcome home," he said simply. Curtis Blake nodded. "Good to be back." "I've read your reports," Dawson continued. "I've also read the intelligence reports from our assets in other systems. The stories about what you did are spreading faster than we ever expected. Half the galaxy thinks humanity has an army of supernatural warriors who can appear anywhere and kill anyone." Maria Lopez shrugged. "Let them think that. Fear is a weapon. The more afraid they are, the less likely they are to test us." "That's exactly what Command believes," Dawson agreed. "Your mission succeeded beyond our wildest hopes. The Velthari are broken. Other potential enemies are reconsidering their plans. And humanity has earned a reputation that will protect us for generations." Danny Ruiz leaned against the wall. "So what happens now? We go back to waiting?" "For now, yes. But don't get too comfortable." Dawson's expression hardened. "The galaxy is a big place, and there are other species out there who might not believe the stories. Sooner or later, someone else will think they can threaten Earth and face no consequences." He looked at each of his operators in turn. "When that happens, you'll be ready." 300 light-years away, Captain Nate Hoffman stood on the bridge of the USS Relentless and read a coded message that had arrived through classified channels. It contained only one line: "Mission complete. The Boogeymen send their regards." He read it twice, then deleted it, allowing himself a small smile. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Amy Vance noticed the expression. "Good news, sir?" "The best kind," Hoffman replied. "The kind no one will ever know about." On a dozen different worlds, in 100 different languages, the stories continued to spread. Traders told them to pass the time on long voyages. Parents told them to frighten misbehaving children. Military academies studied them as examples of psychological warfare done to perfection. And everywhere the stories went, they carried the same warning: Earth was not just a death world. It was not just a planet of survivors. It was a world that had produced something unique in the galaxy, predators who had evolved not just to survive fear, but to become it, warriors who fought not with armies and fleets, but with shadows and whispers, and the primal terror that lurked in every thinking mind. The aliens had looked at humanity and seen prey. They had taunted the death world. Certain that nothing from such a primitive place could threaten them, they had been wrong. In the darkness between stars, where ships traveled and empires rose and fell, a new legend had been born. The legend of the Boogeymen. The legend of the species that didn't just fight its enemies, but haunted them. The legend of humanity, the deathworld's children, who had answered the galaxy's challenge with a simple truth. We don't just survive nightmares, we become them. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, 12 soldiers who officially didn't exist went back to their lives, waiting for the next call. They were shadows now. Ghosts, the things that other species whispered about when the lights went out. They were exactly what humanity needed them to be. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Earth was not to be taunted. Earth was not to be threatened. Earth was home to the Boogeymen, and the Boogeymen were always watching.